Time now to beat the waiver wire on Fantasy Football Today Express. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard. We're talking about guys you can get heading into week 13 that could help you hopefully get ahead of the week 14 bye weeks, but also getting you set for your lineups to make that playoff push. All right, Dave, let's start with the quarterbacks that we're looking to add on the waiver wire ahead of week number 12.
So I look at Drake May, Derek Carr, Will Levis, three quarterbacks that can help you in week 13. Obviously, there's a problem with Drake May because he's on bye in week 14, so he's more of a 1 week guy. And in week 14 for Derek Carr, he's taking on the Giants, so he is a 2 week solution. That would be the direction I would go in if I've got a quarterback situation that I don't like, or if I've been streaming quarterbacks. I would just lean toward Derek Carr. He's got the Rams in week 13, and like I said, the Giants in week 14.
Carr's playing great. His last two performances have been excellent, despite the fact that he's down Chris Olave and down Rashid Shaheed. And so hopefully he stays hot. Both those games are on the road, at home. So, schedule coming up changes a little bit. For Drake May, you can use him in week 12 also. He's got a good matchup against the Dolphins. They've given up 21.9 fantasy points or more in 2 of their last 3 games. So he's been at 21.9 fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 healthy games. And Drake may be a league winner, as we know, because he can use his legs a little bit too. So I like the Drake May call. I like the Derek Carr call. Let's take a look at the running backs, Dave. Who are we looking at for Beat the Waiver Wire?
Let's just talk about those Raiders running backs first, because if you're desperate, you can use them in week 12. Amir Abdullah seems to be our favorite. Dylan Laube looks like he could get some playing time. I'm not ready to say anything positive about Sincere McCormick. We'll just kind of wait and see what happens with the running backs in Vegas. But over the next 2 weeks, 2 games where I think they're going to be trailing. I mean, does it really matter who they're playing? They're going to be trailing against just about everybody. But Denver in week 12, Kansas City in week 13. So if you're really in running back hell, you can look at Amir Abdullah and hope that Amir Abdullah, A, doesn't have any competition from Madison or Zamir White in week 12. They could still practice on Friday, and that they stay on the sideline going into week 13. Otherwise, I'm looking at running backs that are stash worthy and maybe worth a spot start. Roshan Johnson, Gus Edwards, Trey Benson, Cam Akers. Those are the 4 names that stand out the most to me. Other names that you could just stash, particularly if you have the starter in front of them: Jalen Wright, Ray Davis, Blake Corum, and Tyjae Spears is going to get cut in a lot of leagues, Jamie, but I don't think his season's over just because he had a concussion last week. You need to wait and get him cleared first. But once he comes back, the Titans are another team like the Raiders. They're going to play from behind a bunch of weeks, and Tyjae Spears is going to be the one on the field more often, not Tony Pollard.
I think the thing with the Raiders running backs is, first off, it's not a bad idea to pick him up because not only Amir Abdullah, because not only do you have the potential to use him, you're keeping him away from somebody else that could be in need. Remember, 6 teams are on a bye in week 12. You want to see Alexander Madison stay out as opposed to Zamir White staying out if Madison returns, because I think if Madison comes back, then Abdullah's role in the passing game is probably not going to be as prominent. But if it's White and Abdullah, and that's the tandem, which we thought might be the case early this season, remember, before Alexander Madison really got an opportunity to shine for the Raiders, then it could be White working on first and second down and Abdullah working in the passing down situations. And at least for week 12, there have been 8 running backs that have scored 6.8 PPR points or more with just their passing downs work alone. So it could be a great opportunity for him in week 12, and then you see what happens moving forward with those Raiders running backs. But I love the call on the stash candidates, because look, we've been very lucky that we haven't had a lot of significant injuries to some of these workhorse running backs. And James Conner's track record, for example, 3 missed games or more in 5 of his last 6 seasons. Kyron Williams missed some time last year with the ankle injury. We already saw what Ray Davis can do when James Cook missed a game. He had over 20 PPR points. So there's a track record for some of these injured running backs historically, and there's certainly an example of at least one of these backup running backs stepping up and playing well in place of an injured running back. Let's talk about the wide receivers, Dave, that we're looking at heading into week 12 as bye week replace.
And again, same sort of thing that I talked about with the running backs. Who can you use now? Xavier Leggett is still rostered in under 65% of leagues. Alec Pierce, Rashad Bateman, those are always good spot starters at wide receiver. Kendrick Bourne looks like he might be the new number 1 receiver for New England. Not that he's got some amazing speed or quickness, but solid route runner and somebody who's playing a lot more for the Patriots. And we talked about how Drake May is already starting to evolve a little bit more. And then the guy that just can't stop scoring touchdowns in Tennessee, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Long name. He's going to get you 50 points in Scrabble, but he might also be able to come through for double-digit fantasy points for you as a boom-bust wide receiver. Other stash-worthy wideouts. Keon Coleman is still at the top of the list as someone that I would like to have on my bench. I think he'll go right back to a starter's role when he's healthy for the Buffalo Bills. And then how can we deny Marquez Valdez-Scantling 2 weeks in New Orleans, 2 huge games. He's being used like Rashid Shaheed was. Maybe his role evolves a little bit more. Maybe he's not as bad as we thought. It's gross to recommend him for anything other than Scrabble. He might be worth more points than Westbrook Akine. But I do think that he is worth at least putting on the bench as a wide receiver that you use as a boom bust option, certainly going into those matchups in weeks 13 and 14 that we illustrated favorable for the Saints passing game.
I'm going to give you 3 more wide receivers and some tight ends, but first we're going to take a break here on Fantasy Football Today Express. All right, 3 more wide receivers for me. We got 2 injury situations to monitor going into week 13. Darnell Mooney left week 11 with a hamstring injury. The Falcons are on bye in week 12. Ray McLeod could be somebody that could be pressed into action. Tough matchup for the Chargers. Tough matchup with Falcons taking on the Chargers, but McLeod could step up and be needed for Kirk Cousins if Mooney's not going to go. Now, the hamstring injury that he's dealing with is somewhat minor, but still, why not get ahead of it in deeper leagues? And then the Jaguars, even though with Mac Jones, we may get Trevor Lawrence coming back, they're down Gabe Davis. We know they're down Christian Kirk. Parker Washington may be pressed into a bigger role as well, and he's basically free in the majority of leagues. So that's another guy you can look at going into the stretch run. Jaguars are on a bye in week 12. And the Broncos, the Bo Nix is playing fantastic. There's no rhyme or reason to who the second receiver is behind Cortland Sutton. But Devon Vele has had 2 straight games with 10-plus PPR points, and maybe his role continues to grow. Now, week 12, they could get Josh Reynolds back. He's eligible to come off of IR, so keep an eye on that situation. Little Jordan Humphreys had some good moments. Troy Franklin's had some good moments. Marvin Mims has been involved lately. So there's no guarantee that Vele is even the more consistent of the number 2 receivers there for the Broncos. But he's the one for now that I would target. So not a bad option to stash. And then Jalen McMillan, look, we don't know what this is going to look like with – I'll give you 4, I guess. We don't know what this is going to look like for the Bucs moving forward because we have not seen Mike Evans without Chris Godwin and what this group will look like. Cade Otton stepped up in the first 2 games without Godwin and Evans. The third game really was a disaster taking on San Francisco. Now Evans is back. I think we can see McMillan step into that Godwin role. He may not have a lot of spike weeks, but he may be useful and did have 15 targets in the first 2 games where there was the injuries and then the next game after that. So I like the setup for Jalen McMillan, also another guy that's basically free on in the majority of leagues. All right, Dave, let's talk about the tight ends that fantasy managers could look at.
So everybody gravitated toward Jonnu Smith off the waiver wire. Not everybody went after Will Dissly. He's still out there in 44% of CBS Sports leagues. Can't emphasize enough putting him on your bench, especially if your tight end is going to be on bye this week, week 12, or in week 14. Looks like somebody who's going to be an actual part of the Chargers passing game week in and week out from here and the rest of the season. Cole Kmet also qualifies as being under the 60% threshold is available in fantasy leagues at tight end. And then after that, there isn't anybody that you can get really excited about. Jatavion Sanders is interesting. Theo Johnson is interesting. We saw Colby Parkinson score last week. So if you're looking for a tight end, I would stop this video right now and go get Will Dissly and then come back and watch the rest of the video. To me, he's someone that's just a good piece for a fantasy bench. Maybe even if you already have a good tight end, just to play keep away from others in your league, but especially if you've been struggling at tight end for the last few weeks.
He's basically scored similar fantasy points to Jonnu Smith. They both, in 4 of their last 5 games, Jonnu's been 7.5 PPR points or more in 4 of those games, 4 of those 5 games. Dissly's been 8 PPR points or more in 4 of those 5 games. The spike weeks have been the same. They both had a huge game twice over that span. I think it's interesting to see, we don't know how long this concussion situation is going to linger for Jake Ferguson. So Schoonmaker just had 10 targets against the Texans last week. So he's somebody for week 12 that we've talked about. He's only 7% rostered right now. So maybe he has some long-term appeal if they're going to shut down Ferguson for any stretch of games. And then I don't think it's a bad idea in deeper leagues, especially tight end premium leagues. Why not Noah Gray? We know that this Chiefs offense right now is still a work in progress. Gray just had 2 touchdowns last week against Buffalo. You're chasing a little bit. You don't want to fall in that situation. But still, what happens if something happens to Travis Kelce? We could look at it as a tight end handcuff here, which is never a bad thing in this offense. So he's not a bad one in some deeper leagues. There was one more name I was going to bring up. Why am I forgetting now? It'll come to me. I'll bring it up on another show. But in any event, I like the calls on Jatavion Sanders and Theo Johnson, especially with Johnson, because we don't know what Tommy DeVito is going to do. He did lean on Daniel Bellinger a little bit last year. And Sanders, the schedule sets up amazing for the Panthers. I wonder if they'll go back to Andy Dalton at some point, just in the near future.
I don't know. They've won a couple of games here with Bryce Young.
Yeah,
so that would surprise me if they did that. Juwan Johnson was the name maybe you were thinking?
No, it was maybe Davis Allen. Just with 2 games ago, he was a little bit more involved than he was last week, so he's
Okay.
somebody to keep an eye on. But there was somebody else I was thinking about. I don't remember.
All right. If you let us know, we'll be better off for it. DSTs. This is tough. I don't think that there's a really an easy slam dunk DST that's out there in the majority of the leagues. A lot of fantasy managers did good by picking up the Bucks, the Commanders. A lot of bad offenses are taking on DSTs that are already highly rostered. If DeVito stinks, could the Cowboys DST come through? If Cooper Rush plays like Cooper Rush, and if CeeDee Lamb is hurt, then the Giants DST is in play,
I
especially
like
with
the
their
Giants DST
secondary.
because that pass rush is nasty.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Their pass rush is about to get stronger with Kayvon Thibodeau coming back. So maybe the Giants DST is where I'd go, but it's between them and then the Cowboys. Like I said, the Chargers play at Atlanta. If the Falcons play like they did in their last game, then that's a great DST. And then the Rams are taking on New Orleans. Maybe they can get pressure on Derek Carr and get a couple of sacks on him.
All right, that'll do it for us here on Fantasy Football Today Express. Go beat the waiver wire, get ahead of your league. That's what we're here to do. We're here to help you be better than everybody else in your fantasy leagues. For Dave Richard, I'm Jamie Eisenberg. Thanks for watching.